This is actually gigantic news, and it's not being talked enough about. So we've already sent billions upon billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine. Military aid, which has been used to great effectiveness in the field when it comes to javelins. We're sending over howitzers now. Heavy weapons are being sent in larger portions from a lot of NATO countries. And it's making a real strategic difference on the field when it comes to the capabilities that the Ukrainian military has. We've even sent over our old Soviet stockpiles. The Polish government is sending over tanks. 120 tanks just disappeared, and we, for the first time, have had the Polish government publicly acknowledge that, yeah, they sent over tanks. Now, we have sent over billions upon billions of dollars already, but the Biden administration has now called for the most massive military aid package that I could possibly have imagined, much bigger than anything that I thought the Biden administration was ever going to propose. The Biden administration is proposing that we send $33 billion to Ukraine in aid. Now, to be clear, $20 billion of this is actual military aid. A significant amount of it is, humanitarian in nature, like rebuilding. You get the idea, right? But still, $33 billion in aid. This is a massive amount of money, a gigantic amount of money. I cannot emphasize enough how much money this is. To put this in perspective, the entire Russian military budget is $66 billion. The Ukrainian military budget is around $6.7 billion. This is gigantic. This is going to not have a marginal impact in the field when it comes to battles. This will most likely, if approved in any capacity, if this was cut in half and sent to Ukraine, this is still going to have a massive effect on top of the aid we have already personally sent to Ukraine. I mean, think about how much money we're exactly sending here. Now, this could also give us, this is a whole conversation we could have about political will and how we have the political will to do this. We have the avenues and financial connections to do this. And isn't it cool that we can drop all this money to do this? But what about the money for healthcare? What about the money for more COVID aid, the child tax credit, all of that? That is stuff that I would love to have that conversation on another day. And I do want to put this note here, but I do want to just emphasize the amount Biden is leaning in to this checkbook to try to send over to Ukraine. And I'm telling you, there is no way in hell that when Vladimir Putin found out how big this amount was, his eyes didn't just go like this. They didn't just... imagine. You have a $66 billion military budget. You're invading Ukraine, which has a $6.7 billion military budget. Then you have billions of dollars start flooding in from the United States, probably around $5 billion at this point. So already a massive amount of money. And that's just the United States. That's not including the United Kingdom, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Finland, Norway, even Luxembourg, Spain, Austria. All these other places that have jumped on, right? France. Don't want to leave out the French. Yeah, I know. I don't want to leave out the French. And then that's already insane. We've seen Putin's rhetoric on this constant chest beating of nuclear weapons and the Western. These are legitimate Western targets when you're bringing in aid, et cetera, et cetera. Really doing everything he can, using every political tool in his imagining to try to stop this aid from flowing in to Ukraine, this aid which has been used to great effectiveness to win the battle for Kiev, to win the battle for Sumy, to win the battle of Cherniv, to stop the Russians from taking Kharkiv, right? And then, after already having to deal with these levels of military aid and having a meeting, like 3 days ago, of 40 separate countries together, trying to figure out how to coordinate even more aid to Ukraine, he wakes up to the news of a $33 billion proposal for aid to Ukraine. Will they get $33 billion through? No, but that's a massive amount of weapons. That's a massive amount of money to send into the country. I remember hearing recently that, well, what about the Ukrainian economy? I hear all the time about the Russian economy taking blows, taking hits through the sanctions, which is true. We all acknowledge that it's true. But what about the Ukrainian economy? It's taken like a 40 to 50% hit, much bigger than the Russian hit. That is true. The difference is, I think the Ukrainian people have more of a will to sustain that because this wasn't something that their government brought upon them. This was something the Russians brought upon them. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, Ukraine largely has a blank check from the West. If it has a financial issue, it goes to the West, tells them the issue, and to a large extent, that issue will be mostly dealt with by the West. They will be like, okay, you need aid? You need aid? Okay, we can figure this is. Well, let's go talk to the IMF. Let's go talk to this. Let's go talk to our buddies. You need these weapons? Let's see what we can do. Now, the weapons is a little bit more marginal because countries like Germany, it's got, them sending tanks is, on the edges, which we're going to talk about that in a second. But for most, in the MiG-29 fighter jets was probably the one thing where we saw that the West kind of like pulled back on a little bit. But for everything else, they've largely gotten a blank check. Ukraine asks for it, Ukraine gets it. And this is a massive amount of money. I don't understand how. I mean, this is much more than I could have ever imagined asking the Biden administration for. I mean, this almost feels like the Ukraine like went to the Biden administration, said, let's ask for $33 billion. They'll negotiate us down. We'll probably hit maybe like $10 billion or something like that, maybe. And then they were just like, oh, we need $33 billion? Okay. And then boom, that was just a proposal. It'll most likely be cut down. But even if it's half of it, even if it's 15 billion, even less than half, 15 billion would be less than half. That would still be a massive amount of aid, a massive amount of money when you consider that the Ukrainian military budget is 6.7 billion and the Russian military budget is only $66 billion. My goodness. Absolutely. My God. Let's read a little bit of this before we move on, because this is not the only thing I want to talk about, because this is really making me more confident than ever of the Ukrainian ability for them to hold out in this war and drag it into the long run. This war, which is costing the Russian government $20 billion a day. That's another thing. We always talk about the casualty effect on the Russian Federation. We always talk about the losses when it comes to armor, the losses when it comes to jets, the losses when it comes to transport vehicles, the losses when it comes to munitions, the losses when it comes to those killed and or wounded, right? The losses when it comes to morale, the losses when it comes to international prestige, the economic losses. We talk about that all the time. But you know what we don't talk about regularly when it comes to like the losses of the Russian government and what the Ukrainian government's gaining? We talk about those costs all the time, about the normal economic costs on the Russian Federation. But there's one form of economic cost I don't hear anybody talk about, and that is the cost it just takes to run a military operation. You know, when we talk about the war in Afghanistan, we don't talk about like the effect on the stock market that much, right? Like, oh, the international community sanctioned America because of the stock market. That didn't happen, right? Russia's in a different position geopolitically, right? It's economically weaker. It doesn't have the same influence internationally. It wasn't basically the single geopolitical superpower that the United States was past the collapse of the Soviet Union. It didn't have that influence to really stop anybody from really doing shit, right? But one of the things we talk about the most when it comes to the cost of the war of Afghanistan, it's not only the cost of civilian lives, which is talked about less but should be talked about more, the cost to military personnel, soldiers, cost to military contractors who died. Now, not the cost to the military contractors. They made a ton of money. I mean the contractors who died. But the biggest thing is like we spent over $1 trillion. We spent this huge amount of money. We talk about that all the time because the United States could sustain that and not have its economy collapse. The Russian Federation is spending tens of billions of dollars every single day with its operation in Ukraine. Tens of billions. The Russians are spending billions of dollars a day trying to keep this invasion up. And they don't have the endless blank check that Ukraine has when it comes to the West. It has the United States. It has France. It has the United Kingdom. It has, to a certain extent, Germany. It has Norway. It has Finland. It has Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. It has Poland. It has Spain to an extent. It has over 40 countries which just met to coordinate aid. Over 40 countries. It has Taiwan. It has Japan. I'm going to talk Taiwan next segment. It has that blank check. And even though Ukraine has taken a larger economic hit as a percentage of its economy because, it got invaded, kind of hard to, run your nation's economy when your territory is being annexed and your cities are being bombed and people are in mass fleeing the country, it has a blank check. Russia does not have that same blank check. And it's even more difficult for them to be writing checks when they have sanctions on top of it. It would have been much more difficult for the United States to run the war in Afghanistan if on top of the normal costs we incurred from our time in Afghanistan and pumping billions of dollars, which led to over $1 trillion of investment into that war. If on top of that, we were being sanctioned by the most prosperous economic powerhouses in the world. When I talk about prosperous, I mean it's like as a size of its GDP. You guys get the idea, right? America has a lot of issues. So what I'm getting at is this is a game-changing aid package if it goes through. If half of this goes through, who knows how much of a percentage will go through. I think it'll be politically difficult. And the reason why I'm so confident on this thing getting through is it's going to be politically difficult for anyone to, shave off a lot of money from this. You're really going to need to have some people sit down and actually be, and I know it's difficult as a Democrat to hear a Democrat using this word when you hear it so much from Republicans, but we can do this too. Remember, the last surplus we had in the United States was under Bill Clinton. Financial responsibility. There should be some questions asked about how large, right? That should not be the main question asked. I would sign it as is if that was the only option, but those questions are going to be asked, and I think those questions are reasonable considering how much money we are handing over. Those questions need to be answered quickly though, because we need to get the aid out as fast as possible. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of people standing up. And actually, maybe we can quickly talk about this while we have the time. I think I have it on my account, my new banner. I love it. We could talk about it for a second, okay? Wait, I actually passed it. Right here. These are the 8 lawmakers in the entirety of Congress, 450 people just about, who stood against the bill urging the United States to seize the frozen assets of Russian oligarchs and use that money to assist Ukraine. It was Madison Cawthorn, who's in financial trading scandal, multiple other scandals all at the same time. It looks like his own party's purging him, for God's sakes. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, can't get on committees and is a constant scandal for obvious reasons. And actually, recently, there was a story that came out about her proposing martial law to keep Donald Trump in office. Massey, Roy, Bush, Cory Bush is massively disappointing. Ocasio-Cortez, Omar, and Tlaib. Again, massively disappointing. And I would say that out of all the refugees that I've talked to, the Ukrainian refugees, it probably would be weird for me to have to explain to Ukrainian refugees how an American refugee in Congress, somebody who came to America as a refugee, is now not pressuring the country to the full extent they can that caused them to be a refugee. It would be a difficult conversation, but these are the 8 people who stood against it. The people on this list do not have a ton of influence in Congress. Some of them have more than others, but they don't have enough to shave off a ton. And this list is not going to grow too massively when it comes to this AIDS package. And if this is the only 8 people they could get to oppose something like this, there's not going to be a lot of people in the way to stop this bill. So what I'm saying is this bill is going to get through, and this bill is going to get through with a decent amount of meat still on the bone. So it's not going to get shaven down. It's not going to get reduced to a massive amount. Even if you got half through, it would still be a massive AIDS package. Because you got to remember, before we were delivering AIDS packages in like packages of 800 million a pop. And this AIDS package is $33 billion. Again, massive amount of money. That's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Next thing I want to talk about is this. Germany is going to be supplying Ukraine with anti-aircraft systems. You know what these are considered? They're considered exactly what Ukraine has been asking for so long. Heavy weapons. Let me say that again. Heavy weapons. There it is. Germany is now supplying Ukraine with heavy weapons. They're doing it. Could you imagine if somebody said that Germany would do this on February 24th, the day of the invasion? I remember there being skepticism of Germany agreeing to any SWIFT sanctions. And here we are, way in the future, and they are supplying, not even way in the future, just 2 months, actually. It's not way in the future. What am I saying? Way in the future. In 2 months, heavy weapons are being supplied by Germany, which has been known as I don't want to call them like Putin's lapdog in Europe, but somebody who's very heavily reliant on German gas, German resources. I mean, Russian resources. I said German. Of course, relying on German resources. Russian resources are now supplying heavy weapons. And not to mention, Germany's had a semi-pacifistic nature, since the end of the Second World War when it comes to a lot of its lawmakers, is now sending heavy weapons to Ukraine that will be actively used in combat against the Russian Federation. That's massive. That is absolutely massive. Now, originally, this was reported as tanks. These are not tanks in the way that you guys know about tanks. There is a proposal by certain weapons manufacturers saying, hey, we would love to send over 88 Leopard tanks. And you want to know what I say to that? Good. Fantastic. Send them. And you want to know what? I think it's only a matter of time until that happens, until Germany sends more aid. Definitely when you're having these large meetings of 40 countries trying to coordinate aid, you have the United States pressuring the Germans to do it. You've got other European powers pressuring them to do it. You've got international scrutiny being thrown at Germany. I've asked local Polish politicians in my documentary that we're filming about how they view the German country, how they view Germany on this issue, and they view them as weak on this issue. The Polish people view Germany as weak on this issue. It's building up a negative reputation when it comes to European unity, which is something that Germany has always been a proponent of because they've always been pro-European Union, right? Even the most conservative governments in Germany have been pretty pro-EU. And this is a European unity issue against a war in Europe. And they've been a little bit out of lockstep. But I think that's about to change in large part. Not only have we been hearing about Germany swaying off of Russian natural gas a lot faster than we thought, but they're talking about like dates in 2022, 2023. Germany had 586 votes for providing Ukraine with heavy weapons in the Bundestag. If I told you that my native homeland was Germany, you would all be very ashamed of me right now. It was 586 votes to about 100. It was a 5-1 margin. A 5-1 margin in Germany to send Ukraine heavy weapons on top of what has already been agreed to by the German government when it comes to the heavy weapon anti-air systems. Can I just show you the heavy weapon anti-air systems? Does anybody have this? Let me show you this. Can we just show footage of this? When I say these are heavy weapons, I think you guys are thinking anti-air, so they're like Stinger missiles. No. Let me be very clear. These things right here.
Unsere Ziele können bald auch deine sein.
Look at this.
Der Gepard durchtrennt das Seil eines Schleppzieles. Die Roland-Rakete lässt dem Flugkörper keinen...
Das Drone ist kaputt.
Der
Like anime music.
Trifft eine Zieldrohne. Wir lassen dich nicht hängen. Flugabwehr, eine Sache, die begeistert.
So, let's review. The Germans are sending heavy weapons to Ukraine. That's confirmed. And the Bundestag, whatever, has voted 5-1, which now reflects also German public opinion, which has massively shifted, to send Ukraine heavy weapons as well. So we might be seeing those 88 tanks from the Germans sent over, on top of the Polish tanks, on top of all the support we've seen everywhere else. The United States, I haven't talked about this either, is also sending aircraft parts to repair old Soviet aircraft that Ukraine has in stock to put more planes in the sky. Because you want to know what? The airspace over Ukraine is still contested. We all thought that Ukraine's airspace, air superiority for the Russian Air Force in 72 hours. That's not happening. And the United States is proposing, at least the White House is, we're going to see how it goes through Congress, a $33 billion aid package containing $20 billion of military aid to Ukraine, when the last package we sent over was $800 million. This is game-changing. And this is just not the United States. This is not just Germany, because over 40 countries have met to figure out how they can get more weapons to Ukraine to fight the Russian invasion. Putin thinks he's a chess master. I don't think he has a lot of moves left. The Russian economy, I don't think it can sustain itself against such a heavy inflow of weapons. And it can flow enough weapons into Ukraine without something as drastic as what? General mobilization? A formal declaration of complete war? Total war? And if they were to escalate to that point, the West would probably escalate back and just send more. I think Putin might have honestly met his match in Joseph R. Biden. My God, what a timeline. That Joseph Biden, the corn pop man, was the one to snipe Putin from across the field. My God, what a timeline. Sleepy Joe got him. Sleepy Joe put him to sleep. One of the things they said the Biden administration should do is send Anthony Blinken. Remember when I said that multiple times and I was kind of angry the White House hasn't sent somebody yet? And it was Boris Johnson who did it before us. America #1, baby. Biden administration did it. Biden has literally done every single thing I've requested of him on this issue and more. Biden has exceeded my expectations on this issue with flying colors. This is the difference between American and Joe Biden's leadership on an issue like this and Donald Trump's leadership on an issue like this. You think Donald Trump could have coordinated NATO and got 40 countries in line? You think Donald Trump could have been the one to actually pressure the Germans enough to make them send heavy weapons? I'm sorry. No way in hell.